Hi, hello, I'm Deviraj. Welcome back to my series about body-based therapy. And today we're going to be looking at resistance. It's a really useful kind of idea to study and to understand. And particularly if you like to work on your own with therapy, then it's vital. Basically, it's vital. There's no other word for it. And when I say resistance, what I mean is essentially, it's a little bit like what you might study in physics or something like that, friction. But it's like an example is, when you know something is good for you, when you know it's going to be good for you to do this, but you just don't do it. You just don't do it, or you're in the middle of a process and suddenly it just seems so fucking hard, or whatever, and you don't want to do it, And so let's take a look. Let's take a little look. I'm handheld today. Understanding resistance, and I've made a few little headings here. In fact, what I'll also say to start with is why it's so vital to understand resistance is if you want to work on your own, because on this YouTube channel, of course, a lot of you guys out there are working on your own. When I started to do therapy myself, it was always groups, and the advantage of the group, and we'll look at the disadvantages in a minute, but the advantage of doing group therapy is that one, you've got one or two people leading the group and they've got a lot of experience and they can see you, they can give you feedback, they can direct you, they can tell you where you're not doing it right. And at a mental ego level, you might not like that, but nevertheless, if you can accept it, it's undeniably good for you. It's good for you. You can go deeper. Another big thing about group process and doing, group therapy and workshops like this is that you've got peers. You've got other people doing the group. And, they will see you in a certain way. They will trigger you in a certain way. Maybe you really have a trip with someone. Maybe you massively fancy someone. There's psychological stimulation going on. Maybe they see you and give you reflections of how they see that are blind spots that you cannot see. And once again, maybe at an ego level, you don't initially like that so much. But, in a properly held group, you can go into that and you can come out and you can clear a lot. So groups are fucking awesome, basically, and it's great to do group therapy. The main problems with group therapy are more kind of circumstantial, as I see it. One, it costs a fucking ton of cash to go and do the group, or it costs some level of money, and maybe you don't have so much money. And the second, even bigger one often is there aren't so many really good groups around, proper, decent group therapy. There's not so much of it about. There's a lot of people bullshitting and claiming to be good at this, that and the other, but really good group therapy where you feel, wow, I'm really in an intense process here and I'm on the edge, but I'm being held. There's not so many places around. I was lucky when I started 15, 20 years ago. I found a place, Osho University in Holland, and worked a lot there. So I learned stuff there, and now I'm running my own thing. But to get back to resistance, what's important to understand is that, when you're working on your own a lot, and it may be that you're forced to work on your own a lot. You don't have buddies around that are into it. You don't have group leaders around. You don't have cash, whatever. You need to understand resistance on a deep level if you're going to keep moving forward. Otherwise, to be brutally honest, it's going to be fucking hard work for you to move forwards on your own. But what can really make a difference, a big difference, in fact, is that you really understand resistance on a theoretical and, of course, a very personal level. So let's have a look at my board. Let's get back over here. And the first thing I wanted to talk about, when I can remember where I put my marker pen, were layers, layers. And what's useful here, by layers, what I'm meaning really is, I'm going to try and hold this so I can do it as well. The idea is that our awareness is kind of layered. And up here on the top is me, my conscious awareness. Up here on the top, that's my conscious awareness. And down here, this is where my heavy, repressed, unconscious stuff is going on, And in between, we have different kind of layers of almost like defensive behavior, mediated in the midbrain probably, according to neurologists, we don't really know, but defensive behavior and essentially blocking us from knowing what's going on in the deep unconscious, essentially. So without making it too much theoretical and give you like a practical example, maybe you're doing like a bioenergetic exercise, something like that. And we're opening up the muscle system in bioenergetics, and a deep kind of primal wound starts to get opened up out of the muscles and starts to rise. Now, in theory, that's a really good thing, because if you can be here and it gets to the top, you're aware of it, you can feel it, you can breathe, you can go through it, you clear it. You clear it, you're clear. Sounds fucking great, eh? Sounds good. But of course, what tends to happen here is that there's processes operating just below the level of your conscious awareness that don't like. They're worried about this all through your life. You know, when these things are triggered, what they've done is they've operated to get you out of there. And so they construct a kind of story, you know, somewhere in your mind. You know, nothing's happening is a classic sign. You know, nothing's happening, so I'll just go and do something else. Suddenly remembering you want to use the phone, you've got something to do, this is no good. These are all kind of back doors, as we used to call them in therapy, you know, back doors, escape routes, where you can get out of encountering what's really coming up. So, you know, this is a very useful idea to understand, this notion that our awareness is kind of layered. Now, I don't know if there actually are layers in the brain, but it's very, very useful to understand it like that. Because then what you can do is start to use what we're talking about here, vigilance. Some kind of eye shape, you know, looking inside. Okay, I'm doing a process. Say you're doing the bow and arch of a morning. You're going to do it for 24 minutes. You know, that's like what? 4 minutes down, 4 minutes up, round 3 times. That's a great morning workout. And, you know, you're halfway through and suddenly it's like, you know, nothing's going on here. There's no point in doing this. I'll go and do another exercise, you know. This story, this narrative starts to come up in your mind. And this narrative starts to come and you just pull yourself out, basically pull yourself out. Now, if you've got vigilance, you've got to say, okay, what's going on here? I'm attaching to this story now, you know, there's this story going on. There's no point in doing this. I'll go and do another exercise, or I don't feel like doing it today. You know, these kind of, you will know your own back door, you know, your own back door ways out. And with vigilance, then what you do is, aha, you have an aha moment. You say, aha, maybe something is really going on and I actually need to focus more and really feel my body, breathe and go through it. You know, that's vigilance. That's vigilance. So that is very, very important. I don't really, you know, it's so important. If you can't use this, you know, a basic level of discipline to start to say, okay, I'm going to do this process for 25 minutes now. I'm going to do it for 10 minutes now. Whatever it is, set upon a time and then stick to it and then look inside when you want to get out of there. When the old back door starts to try and open and say, no, I'm going to breathe and I'm going to feel and I'm going to really, you know, get in touch with what's happening. And then you can move deeper, you know, without having to pay for a group leader. Without having a load of peers that say to you, hey man, you're backing down now. You're not. I don't feel you anymore. You know, you've copped out of there somewhere. You've escaped into your mind. You know, without that, you can start to call yourself. You know, with this vigilance. So vigilance is really, really great. Something else that can really work with certain types of resistance, and it's a good principle to understand in therapy, is physicality. And that, but by that, what I mean is essentially the idea that resistance can be useful, or one way to overcome resistance is to make it physical. For instance, you know, I'm running a lot of workshops and doing group therapy and bioenergetics and stuff, and mixed up together really. And it's like, essentially, you know, 1 or 2 participants, I can feel them kind of going off. Maybe they're creating their own little 5th column within the group or something like that. Or people who are a bit complainy, you know. I'm working a lot with British. I'm also working quite a lot with Italians, and we love to complain. We complain like fuck, you know. So, you know, you start complaining. Now, something you can do, you know, or, you know, feeling a bit kind of like, undermining, whatever. You give people space to make it physical. These are forms of mental resistance, you know. And if you're using some kind of mental resistance like complaining, and people are complaining a lot, and you can feel them whinging a bit in the background, you know, it's quite an intense process. Maybe it's sunny outside and they don't want to do the process. You know, but they're paid to do it. So you're a workshop leader, you want to hold the process. So you can give space for them to really make that physical, you know, walk around the room with the whole structure, complaining like fuck, you know, really waving your arms around, moaning at each other, really putting it out there. All your grouches about the workshop leader, about how sunny it is outside, what a load of crap this workshop is and how you wish you never paid for it. Stick it all out, make it physical, and something starts to move. So that you can, you know, you can look if you can adapt that into your own resistant techniques. Being lazy, you know. Give yourself space to be utterly fucking lazy for a bit until you're sick of it, you know. Really be aware of your laziness. Bring awareness in as well, you know. This is what we're doing. When you make something physical, something starts to move on a certain level. So when you've got a whole room full of complainers or people who just want to blame someone or they don't really want to be there, you know, once they can act that out physical, something moves for them and they feel, okay, maybe I can get into this process more deeply and stop using my little back doors. So that's what I mean here by physicality. And awareness is important as well, you know. So it's really what you get with physicality, you know, is that you feel your body, you feel what's going on when you're actually doing the complaining or when you're doing the resistance. If you know your resistance, you can exaggerate it and feel it, or just really feel it, and it takes you deeper. It takes you deeper, you know. So there's a lot you can use here. I also wanted to include one little other thing in here, which actually, I can't remember when I was at school, we did physics, and there was this thing called the bifurcation point. Anyway, the bifurcation point is what I remember about it, and I could be totally fucking wrong here, so anyway, you know, the physics of it doesn't really matter because I'm going to talk about it in psychological terms. But what I remember is that some metals, you know, you start to stretch them, and they kind of stretch evenly to start with, and at some point they just flip out and they just lose it, you know, and they just gone, they just spin out and you know, they tangle up all over the place and they go crazy. And it's not the ideal metaphor because that's not what happens to the human psyche. But when you put someone under a lot of emotional, physical pressure, you can hit a certain point where they spin out. You know, they just check out of there, or their whole system can no longer... If you've been holding on to a lot of repressed pain all your life and you're in this intense group, you know, at some point your mental resistance is going to decline and it just starts to come out. I had this experience myself when I started to do group therapy. I was about 5 groups in, and suddenly we've been doing this intense screaming and shouting for like an hour or something, half an hour, I can't remember, and I just burst into tears. And I hadn't cried for like a decade or something before then, and I just burst into tears. It was pouring out of me, and people were like stroking me and, you know, saying it was good and stuff, and I had no clue what was going on. I'd hit a certain point inside of me where, you know, I could no longer control the emotional pressure underneath from my mind. And so what you can do sometimes with process work, and you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't get too much on the edge here and go crazy, you know, but you can take things right to the edge, because then, you know, you can spontaneously create something that can change, you know. It's not mental change in the sense that it's not you controlling all the time who you want to be next, what you want to work on next. You just go totally into a process, very, very deep, and essentially at some point you kind of, I don't know, you kind of lose yourself, and your personality reconstructs in a certain way, you know. Generally with this kind of work, you know, it needs to be held by someone who knows what they're doing, you know. But I wanted to put it in there because it's similar kind of concept to resistance, you know, this idea that you don't have to mentally formulate all of your changes in life. And how it relates in particular with bioenergetics is through the idea of the comfort zone. This is a great favourite of mine. You know, if you place yourself, you know, if you're sitting in your comfort zone all the time, you can't really fucking change. You know, how are you going to change if you're always comfortable? Very, very hard to change, you know. And if you're always pushing yourself right beyond the edge, you know, you tend to re-traumatize yourself in reality. So what's useful to understand is that if you actually operate right on the edge of your comfort zone, and you stay right on this edge here, you know, right on this edge of a comfort zone, then essentially change happens spontaneously without mental direction. It's a little bit similar to this concept of a bifurcation point. I don't feel like I've explained it totally well. It's not something to really freak you out. But the idea is that the bifurcation point, really, where natural change happens, not directed by your thinking mind, by your ego, is when you stay on the edge of your comfort zone. You stay right on the edge. When you're on the edge, you can't really think so much, you know, you're right on the edge. And so, you know, when you're doing like a bioenergetic practice that's quite intense, most of them are, see if you can just really stay really present in your body, right on the edge of what you can tolerate. Not pushing it so far you hurt yourself, and not being so fluffy that you kind of give up every 10 seconds, but right on the edge of what you can tolerate. And this is a fantastic thing to help you change without so much guidance or leadership. You know, if you can stay right on the edge of your comfort zone, then change can happen spontaneously. Really what's happening at the muscular level, the muscles are giving stuff up and your mind is reconstructing itself. It doesn't really have the power it thinks it does, but, you know, and the body is supporting it. The brain is supporting it. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some useful insights about resistance. And you know, I just want you, you know, you're watching this, if you're involved in bio and you're involved in therapy, you know, that you can keep on stepping up and moving forwards. So feel free to leave comments, what's working for you, not working for you, whatever. You know, it's all useful for me. I'm looking more and more, how can guys who are, you know, by that I mean men or women, who want to get change, but they're away from, you know, group therapy, or they don't have the money for it. They can't get in the location where it's going on. What can be done to support you guys? You know, so that you can go deeper. So that's why I'm talking a lot about resistance and these kind of things. Because if you understand this, you can start to call yourself on your own bullshit and go deeper. And of course, it's still wonderful to do groups. Okay, that's enough from me for today. Over and out, and, you know, stick with it. Stick with it. Keep doing it and keep going for it. Bye for now.